return. So I'm going to do this briefly because we have a lot to still cover. And I want to make sure we get through all of it. And I don't want to spend too much time on just the United States chart, but you guys wanted to know about it. And I always, allow you guys to guide what it is that we're doing here in the cosmic community as much as possible. And so this is the chart for the United States, the Sibley chart. So this is the chart for the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is coming full circle at this time. So first and foremost, if you want to know what the United States Pluto return is going to bring, just look around you. These long-term transits, and especially a Pluto transit. Pluto is like the slowest moving planet. It's the farthest planet from us in our solar system. It has a very long, slow, transformative impact. And that's going to be the case in the United States Pluto return. It already started a couple of years ago. It's especially impactful right now, and it's going to continue to be impactful well beyond 2022. And so I would say within a few years before and after, you're seeing really what's coming up for the United States Pluto return. I'm going to reference something that is not my own research. This is from William Stickovers, who does mundane astrology way better than I. But he talked about and he showed this graph actually that showed all of the major empires, the major world empires throughout history, and sort of the rise and fall of these empires. And the rise, between the rise and the fall, would always be roughly 250 years, which is one Pluto cycle. The Pluto cycle is 248 years, and that was give or take a decade or two. And the only exception to that was the first Pluto return of Rome, right? So we had like the fall of the Roman Empire. That actually came after, that was the second Pluto return. So we had one Pluto return that transformed Rome and turned it into something completely different. And then we had a second Pluto return that, destroyed the empire. And so empires fall, world powers fall at the time of the Pluto returns. They have to either transform completely and become something very different than what they were before, or they go away, right? And something else takes over, some other power takes over. And obviously, the United States is not like an empire in the traditional sense, but it is one of the prevailing influencing forces when it comes to the way the rest of the Western world operates, and it has been for quite some time. It's considered a world superpower. So you can kind of surmise what that could mean for the US Pluto return. And so kind of looking at the chart from that like mundane astrological perspective and what the houses mean in mundane astrology, we're going to be looking at the second house, but also we'll be looking at so we'll be looking at all of the planets that are being activated by this transit in the second house and where those are located in the chart and what those represent. And so there's a lot of stuff going on here. The big thing, obviously, is that this is in the United States' second house. The second house has to do with the economy, very literally, purchasing power, trade, the supply chain, although that's more than just that house, but basically the exchange of material goods. That's the second house. And so that's where there's an energy of like intensity, transformation. That's where a lot of the disturbance is sort of centered around with the US Pluto return. So there could be an overhaul of the financial system, which you're also seeing with Uranus and Taurus, as kind of on a more broad scale. We have opposing Mercury in the 8th house. And so the 8th house in like a nation's chart represents like national debt, welfare, social security, government programs that provide financing through outside means, basically through taxing the public. So they tax some people and then give the money to others. That is like an 8th house thing. And so you could see transformations and developments and changes involving like welfare. We had all of these stimulus programs with COVID and all of that. Also like national debt, so debts that are owed to other countries. You could see some turbulence or something going on around that. Taxes could change, or the tax structure could change. There could be different government programs that come in that provide financing through outside means, those types of things, or those things could collapse. Like we could see the collapse of certain systems around those things. Mercury is very literally. So this is also interesting to me too, because the United States has a lot of eighth house energy, and Mercury in the eighth house. And one of the things I didn't realize until one of my friends who's Irish, she like pointed this out to me. She's like, I was like, what do you think about when you think about Americans? And she's like, conspiracies. I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, other countries don't have that like you guys do. Every American is like interested in conspiracy theories and like all this stuff. And I didn't realize that was a more American thing than it might be in some other places. I'm sure it exists in other places, especially because we're like living in a global society. But she lived in America and in Ireland and some other countries too. And like that was a bigger thing in America. Anyway, opposing Mercury in the eighth. So Pluto return is opposing Mercury in the eighth house. That's interesting, that Pluto Mercury opposition and Mercury in the eighth house and all of that. But Mercury is, so this is what I would say about this: the exposure of confidential information through information sharing outlets, especially related to seventh house topics and themes, which has to do with foreign relations and treaties and alliances and things like that. That kind of stuff could come up. But basically, like a lot of leaks and a lot of information being exposed that is meant to be hidden and things like that. A lot of intense information being exposed. Mercury is the ruler of the seventh house, so potentially a great reveal related to foreign relations, alliances, also things coming up around open enemies of the United States, and maybe, we already know who those like potentially could be, and there's already been some like weirdness in the past couple years with those countries. And it could also more like on a kind of more basic level be related to a nation's divorce rates. You could see rise and falls in that. Death rates, you can see rise and falls in that with the eighth house topics. The thing that is also interesting is that Mercury is the ruler of the 10th house. So we could see, and this is the thing that I think is most significant, we could see a transformation within the role of the presidency in general, or this could impact the current president or reflect his presidency. It also represents a transformation in the public status or the public reputation of the United States among other nations. And then obviously Pluto's the modern ruler of the 12th house. So this could be a collapse and transformation of the hospital and healthcare system in the United States, especially with Uranus transiting the United States 6th house, which has to do with public health. And also it could be a transformation or a change in all of the 12th house institutions, like the prison system, care homes, nursing homes, retirement communities, things like that. Also, the 12th house is said to be related to like the deep state or the shadow government, or whatever you want to call that, as well as slavery and issues pertaining to human trafficking. And so we could see things around that coming up to the surface, which we have in the past few years already. So those are the big themes, right? Pretty not pleasant, it's stuff is happening here. And it's being exacerbated, I think, a little bit by some of these other configurations. And again, I'm not like, mundane astrology is not my main thing. I know the basics. I know enough to dabble, so I'm not going to go farther into it than this. But for historical reference, I wanted to see what happened when we had the exact Pluto opposition in the United States Pluto return chart, and this happened between 1935 and 1937. So you would want to look to basically the entire 1930s and maybe even early 1940s to see what that opposition brought. And so just like with the Pluto return, it's active before and after. And so we had a lot of things that, that could be themes that are coming back around, right? So we saw the Dust Bowl. That was also, Uranus in the 6th house, agriculture, that type of thing. We're having that right now too. So it is relevant. It's again, right? It's happening again. But we also had a transformation of currency, not just here, but in a lot of places around the world. So the USA dropped gold backed currency and everybody else did the same. We weren't actually the first to do that, but it happened, pretty much across the board. Prohibition ended, which I thought was an interesting one. That might be with the Neptune return, but it's something to think about. And especially because I'm going to be making some predictions about things like that with Neptune conjunct Jupiter and all that too. Also, we had communist takeover of China. I included that because not because it was like a big thing for the United States necessarily as much last time, but because I think it could be relevant because this is a cycle kind of that was a peak of a cycle and it's a new cycle that's starting and all of that. So I think that that could be relevant. Obviously, Hitler's rise to power and the beginning of World War II, which is a big world war that the United States ended up entering into in the end. And so these are all things that happened last time. I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I'm saying this because the Pluto returns are not considered to be like easy times for a nation. Um, and that's where we're at right now. So that's all I have to say about that. That's all I know about that. To say, I think that this just doubles the impact of like the fact that we're already in a period where there's going to be a financial change and a kind of a movement in the way that we deal with currency. We've already been moving in that direction for quite some time. And last time we lost the gold standard, and now Pluto return in the second house because that was in the eighth house, which also has to do with finances, opposing Pluto in the second. I would say that, this time around, there could be other things related to that that could come out of this. But yeah, so that's what I'm seeing there.